Okay, with no further ado, we're thrilled to see such a packed room. I know this is a busy day in Washington, so we're so appreciative of you being here. My name is Maura Corbett, and I am Executive Director of the Wireless Innovation Alliance, the sponsor of today's event. I hope you've taken advantage of the tables around the room that show kind of a broad spectrum, no pun intended, of all the benefits that white spaces stand to deliver for all Americans. We feel very strongly that white spaces are the last great hope for consumers and innovators. It's really, as a lot of you know, it's the last chance for this country to get spectrum right. We don't have any more chances. And in difficult economic times, being spoken about at other areas of the Hill today, the benefits to innovation and American competitiveness are so critical, and this is what we feel a no-brainer way to get these innovations and creativity and economic benefits out into the marketplace. Why this is the last chance? Because there's only so much beachfront property in the public spectrum, and unfortunately, most of it is private. And there's one public property left. So we can either have it private, licensed, and restricted, like all the beachfront property is now, or we can have it open for all Americans. The only ones who benefit from licensed spectrum are the license holders. What we want to do with white spaces is have consumers and all Americans benefit because it is a public resource. Larry Page is here today, and we're delighted about that, and he will explain far more eloquently than I could ever that more access means more services and applications, which translates into real dollars for our country. So we can either give it to the broadcasters who want to keep this unused spectrum for themselves. We can give it to the incumbent wireless carriers who want it for their own purposes, much like the rest of their beachfront property that's private and restricted, or we can have it for all of us. Really, the time is now to do the right thing and keep the white spaces open for us all. But don't take it from me. I know nobody came here to hear us talk. We brought a lot of people here to Washington, many who traveled great distances to be here today to tell you why white spaces really matter to every American. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Mark McHenry from Shared Spectrum. They have an incredibly cool demo over there on the right-hand side of the room. Mark, why don't you give us a minute or two about why you're here today?
Well, I guess the reason we were invited here is there's a lot of question, does DSA, Dynamic Spectrum Access, work or not? For the last 6 or 7 years, we've had a lot of Department of Defense contracts to develop DSA, but for the military bands and not for white space. So we brought our DSA system here. You're welcome to go see a demonstration how it works. And on the side, we've been working on the white space. We have a white space detector, and we also have some papers, technical papers back there that describe some of our white space tests. So I think that this question, does it work? Will we cause an interference? I think we've conclusively proved through all our DoD tests it does work. It doesn't cause interference. It's not expensive. And so we're very hopeful this white space thing goes through. So
Thanks, Mark.
again, go check our demo out.
Thank you. Just before I introduce Mark Lloyd from LCCR, the format today, we're going to have 3 panels, and we'll end up at about 1. We'll keep things moving quickly. All of the panelists most if not all of the panelists will be sticking around after 1. We have a tight schedule. We want to be able to incorporate any questions that the press here today has and any of you. So we will make our panelists available after 1 for you guys to talk to individually. So with no further ado, Mark Lloyd from the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights. He's here today. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Maura. So, I mean, if I could just make a brief note, talking a little bit about values, because we don't do that very much. Very deeply rooted American value is that all Americans, without regard to race or gender or ability or disability, really ought to have a fair opportunity to compete, to participate in our governance, to really sort of take care of themselves in a way that, again, that's fair And the degree to which we can level the playing field, the degree to which we can make sure that all Americans have an equal opportunity and equal chance is really what we are pushing for at the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights. It's a coalition concerned about a wide variety of groups. One of our strongest members is the American Association for Retired People. Another strong member is the American Association for People with Disabilities. Recent survey in California indicated very clearly that those with disabilities have a lower access and chance to have access to the internet and high-speed broadband services than those who don't have disabilities. Another recent survey in California indicated that folks who are Latino have less access to the internet and computer use than non-Latinos. These are very important members of our constituency and our services. And again, these are not natural problems. These are problems that are created as a result of policies that we put forward. When we put spectrum in private hands rather than making it public, when we put policies forward that limit the access that some people have and don't limit the access that other people have, this is a policy choice that we make. And again, our struggle is making sure that we make intelligent policy choices that allow all Americans to have equal opportunity and access in the United States. And we believe that spectrum reform, wireless access, is extraordinarily important in achieving that.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
From another important constituency, John Windhausen is here today from EDUCAUSE. John, why don't you say a few words about why you're here today?
Yes, thanks, Maura. And as you mentioned, I'm here on behalf of EDUCAUSE. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. For those of you who don't know, EDUCAUSE is a coalition of about 2,000 colleges and universities all across the country. And it's primarily the members of EDUCAUSE are the managers of the IT networks. So these are the folks who are responsible for making sure that the communications needs of the entire college community are met. And when I talk about the entire college community, I mean the students, the professors, and the administration, and increasingly the community that surrounds the college and university. And I think the colleges and universities in particular are one of the ways of trying to accomplish the objectives that Mark just set forth, because the purposes and benefits of this technology really can apply to everybody. And the colleges and universities are trying to bring learning to everywhere, to everybody. And that is inherently a mobile environment where students, teachers, administrators, and the community around those college campuses are inherently mobile. So they need access to greater spectrum. Just one example of this, if I can hold this right side up, is a study put out, why are wireless services important to state and education leaders? You know, this is an entire report solely focused on the importance of wireless communications to the ability of colleges and universities to serve their mission, which is to expand the educational opportunities for all Americans. And that's why they care very deeply about the availability of white spaces that provides them a huge new opportunity to expand their educational mission.
Thanks, John. Roger Caccetti is here from CompTIA. We're very glad to have him here today representing a lot of the enterprise networkers. Roger, why don't you give us a few words on why you're here today?
Thanks, Maura. Glad to. The Computing Technology Industry Association, CompTIA, is this nation's largest computer industry trade association. We include as members most of the largest hardware, software, and service vendors, but distinctly we represent this nation's 40+ thousand value-added resellers. These are the small computer companies that are systems integrators, and they're the people who provide the computer networks for your dentist and your real estate agent and your small law firms and other of the nation's millions of small businesses. Increased access to spectrum, particularly low-frequency spectrum, is important to all of our members, but particularly to our small business members and the small businesses who they serve. To put this in some perspective, I think, as most of you know, about 15 years ago, the computer industry in the United States and eventually the world sort of entered a new era of networked computing, where it wasn't freestanding computers, but it was networked computers that sort of drove applications. And this is because network computing makes people more productive, more efficient, more powerful. The issue of connectivity, which is where spectrum comes in network computing, has been an obstacle, particularly at the small business end. Running wires around offices or running wires between two offices and things of that sort can be a cost and a logistics obstacle for many small businesses. Spectrum affords our members and small businesses an opportunity to leapfrog that and get into applications, whether they're video, data, voice, or anything else that will make them more productive and more efficient. The more low-frequency spectrum we have available for small business, there's just no question, the more productive, the more new applications, and the more efficient they'll be. So this is an important measure, we think, for the health of American small business and, through it, the health of the American economy. Thank you.
Thanks, Roger. We hear so much about the digital divide, so much about the need to connect rural America to the global economy. We're delighted to have Wally Bowen here today, who has traveled up from North Carolina, representing the Mountain Area Information Network, Maine. They've got a booth over in the back of the room as well. Wally, so why'd you travel up from North Carolina on a day such as today?
Well, we have a serious problem, and we're, first of all, Maine is a nonprofit internet service provider, and we've been operating in the mountains of North Carolina since 1996. Now, I don't think anybody here in this room is still using dial-up internet access. Let me tell you that according to a Pew Research, internet research study just last year, only a third of rural Americans have broadband internet. And I know firsthand how many people are suffering with dial-up internet access. They made progress using the internet, starting home-based businesses, telecommuting, advancing themselves in their careers, and now with so many web applications shifting to broadband, the progress they've made is at risk. So that's why I traveled up here, because we need to be hearing the rural voices that are still using dial-up, folks who can't afford broadband even if it is available, folks who can't afford computers. And so our work has been all about reaching people with disabilities, one of our core constituencies, and other underserved populations in the rural areas. The white spaces are extremely critical. We know it'll work. We've been doing wireless internet in the mountains since 2003, and 6 out of 10 people who want our service can't get it. So that's why I'm here.
Thanks, Wally. Really important. I'd like to ask a few questions of the panel. I hope I'm right, at the risk of not offending the rest of you. Mark, you are the only engineer on this panel, yes?
I don't know.
Any engineers? Speak now or forever hold your peace. As an engineer, tell us, I mean, are the white spaces really viable? Is this a real technology?
We believe it is. We built systems. You'll see our systems back there. We did some extended field test about a year ago before we actually committed to building our white space system. Now, we haven't participated in all the FCC stuff because we're a small company. We've got to work where there's money, and that's DOD. But we're fairly convinced that we can put up a 10-watt transmitter to do this rural problem and not cause interference. That if the FCC does anything, they ought to go for the higher power to address the rural market. So we're convinced it doesn't cause interference.
Thanks, Mark.
We're betting on it. We know it doesn't.
Thanks. More shameless promotion. If you want to see how, go to their booth. Mark, interesting what you say about all the constituencies you represent, and you know, rural gets a lot of attention in the digital divide, but rural and underserved are not synonymous. There are a lot of inner cities that have the same access problems that rural areas have. Tell us, what can white spaces do to solve the digital divide problem?
Well, one of the greatest challenges that folks have who are a lot of the challenge, particularly in urban areas, a lot of buildings blocking signals and things like that, but we also have an awful lot of old buildings that are not easily wired. It's much easier to use wireless technology instead of going through a lot of buildings that may still, unfortunately, still have asbestos problems. And so being able to have access to wireless technology to make the connectivity for buildings, and schools have some of the same sorts of issues, as I know John would attest, but the same thing applies to hospitals, the same thing applies to, unfortunately, a lot of affordable housing. And so, no, we have very serious problems. And in addition to, frankly, the cost of affordability, I know there are a number of projects that Microsoft and others have got going around the country providing laptops to kids and they get the laptops at home. But
Doesn't mean anything if they can't get on the net.
Exactly, have no connectivity. So the ability to have a card in that laptop and to be able to communicate via wireless network is extraordinarily important. And so again, this cuts across all of our constituencies, and I've talked an awful lot, and a large part of our constituency really does include folks in rural America as well. So we are concerned about the urban areas, the rural areas, and again, folks who are poor, who are living in affordable housing, and folks who are living in old structures that you really just don't want to send wires through or make it very costly to make the connectivity.
Important. You know, John was telling me something the other day that I thought was fascinating and something I had never thought about before. Maybe it's new to you guys too. For community colleges, you know, nobody lives on campus, or people who travel great distances to go to college. They can't get on the college network. I mean, our colleges and universities have some of the most robust networks around. But if you're off campus and you can't get on, you're stuck. And that's a pretty critical issue.
Well, that's right, Maura. I mean, there are so many aspects of the benefits that wireless technologies can play for colleges and universities, and community colleges is often, unfortunately, one of those aspects that's not often recognized enough. Because, you know, obviously the students who are going to community colleges are often traveling just to the college for their class, but they often have jobs and supporting their families. And so they're not staying on campus all day long. They're not living there. And so the ability for them when they're off campus at their home to be able to access the internet, and frankly the public broadband networks are not keeping up with the demand, especially for students and university needs. I mean, you think of the high-end research that goes on in universities. Well, they need huge amounts of broadband capacity that's just not there under the current system. So we need to make more spectrum available to enhance the students' capabilities. It's also important for economic achievement and capability. And frankly, a lot of the, well, actually, one little factoid that was remarkable to me. How many people, what percentage of students do you think live off campus? 40%, 50%, 60? Turns out 80% of students live off campus. And the challenge here is to make sure that the students who live off campus can have the same benefits, the same access to technology, the same access to the teachers and the researchers that the students on campus do. And without greater access to spectrum, particularly this spectrum that can go through walls, right? A lot of the existing campuses may have wireless networks, but they have very significant problems getting into the dormitory or getting into the classroom because the existing spectrum just isn't good enough. And so that's one of the great benefits of this white spaces spectrum that we're talking about, is that it has propagation characteristics that far surpass any of the existing spectrum that's out there. So it really will provide a tremendous boon to education.
Thanks, John. Roger, your comments earlier were interesting. You know, we talk so much about, you know, the problems for broadband access for consumers. We hear less, though equally important, about the effects of the broadband issue on small and medium-sized enterprise businesses. How can white spaces make their situation better?
Well, I think we all know from our daily experience that network computing makes all of us more efficient and productive, whether it's the internet or using an inter-office email system or whatever the case is. It's by now obvious to everyone that network computing is a powerful tool. And that tool has been available, and the reason I focused on small business earlier is not because we represent only small business, but that tool is available from the beginning of the era of network computing to large businesses, because they could afford to run wires at whatever distance through whatever barriers to achieve the efficiencies and improvements that would bring about. The barrier has been the further down the stack you go in business size, the more connectivity becomes a cost and logistical issue. And what that means is that the barrier buster from our point of view, from our members' point of view, is frequency, low frequency spectrum, which can penetrate walls and has the favorable propagation characteristics can permit small businesses to participate in the benefits of network computing where they might otherwise not be able to do so. So it not only gives our members something more and important to sell to small business, which is why they're so enthusiastic about this, but it also provides what we think are really concrete benefits. Almost any small business will improve its productivity, improve its supply side, its administration, or its marketing and sales side through the use of network computing. And without networks, there's no network computing. And if you've got to rely on wires, we may never get there. So the white space spectrum and other ways to get broadband wireless access to small business is important.
Thanks, Roger. Certainly anything that helps support small business in America is, fundamental to our economy. Whether those fundamentals are strong or weak, I will not say. But Wally, to get back to engineering for a second, white spaces, your constituents have broadband either because incumbents have left or terrain prevents, in some cases, the topography prevents broadband from being deployed. What makes white spaces so much better than some of the other broadband options out there?
Well, there's so many. As I said, 6 out of 10 people who want our service can't get it. We recently did a survey of 6,000 of our former dial-up subscribers and people who had inquired about our broadband service. We currently use 900 megahertz, which has some real problems with penetrating foliage and bending around ridges and penetrating buildings. We got so many horror stories about how people are still suffering under dial-up, which I mentioned earlier. But I want to emphasize that the white spaces can not only reach so many more people in rural areas, it can cut our network cost, construction cost, by half or 75% according to some of the estimates we've seen. The other important thing I want to mention is that rural America has suffered under absentee-owned networks for decades now. In the rural counties of the mountains of North Carolina, surrounding Asheville, which is AT&T, all the other counties are served by Verizon. And Verizon, they would like to sell those networks because they're inefficient, they're old. People tell us that whenever it rains, their phone service goes out, their dial-up goes out. Terrible conditions, and Verizon doesn't want to, their business model doesn't work in rural areas. So the white spaces has the potential of returning rural America to its tradition of self-help, where there are community-owned networks, whether they're for-profits, nonprofits, or municipal, and the ability to do self-help. I'll just give you one quick example. When Katrina hit the Gulf Coast, the landlines and cell phone services were down for days, but it was the ham radio operators and the local wireless operators that were up and running in a matter of hours, to the extent that Homeland Security is now putting funding and support behind ham radio operators. So up in Mitchell County, 2 hours north of Asheville, where we have a wireless deployment, the local ham radio chapter is very well organized because in 1998 they had a terrible flood in Mitchell County. So they're very focused on disaster recovery communications. On a Thursday morning back in May, they came to us and said, we'd like a secure network connection to your transmitter on Locust Knob. And that afternoon they had it at no charge. That kind of, I asked Bob Rogers, the head of the chapter, I said, Bob, what would you have done if Maine didn't exist? He said, I would have been tracking down the owner of the tower or trying to get a call through to, layer after layer of Verizon bureaucracy. And even when I did get an answer, it probably would have been no. So the white spaces has the potential of returning this kind of grassroots community collaboration for small businesses, for nonprofits, across the board, which is extremely exciting.
It's such an important point, and we only have so much time today. We could fill an entire afternoon on the benefits of white spaces to first responders, and our public safety challenges. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time today, and Wally just hit the tip of the iceberg, and where there is, real-world examples of how approaches like this are already helping first responders. So just imagine if the white spaces were open, what capabilities that would give us. Please join me. Curtain number 1 is now complete. We're about to show you curtain number 2, but please give our panelists a big hand. And once again, they'll be available after the program.
And please pick up a copy of this brochure, the front table up there. It's got some of the examples that Mara was just talking about.
Visit their booths. We'll take a minute or two and get our next panel together. Please bear with us. Thanks.